and I'd cringe and I'd be like, oh my God, you can't do that. When we fast people, we have a pre-evaluation that involves a metabolic profile blood test because we've got to make sure that there's certain things in the blood work.
You're listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage. We're here to plant seeds on compassion to animals, your health, and the environment, and topics related to business that align with all three of those areas. Enjoy the show. Well, today I am super excited because I am talking with a good friend, a colleague, a man who just has such an important message to share with people, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Now, I could go into a long, drawn-out introduction, but what I prefer is that Dr. Frank actually introduce himself. And once he does, I have a very important question for him before we even start our conversation. So, Dr. Frank, great to have you on the show.
And I thank you, and I thank your audience for joining us today.
You betcha.
My pleasure.
So let's start with giving a bit about your background. You've been vegan for 50 years.
Close to 50 years.
Okay, close to 50 years. You have a stellar reputation within the plant-based community. So let's go back a few years and start with, why did you go plant-based, and give a 30,000-foot view of your background?
Well, you have to understand, growing up in the 50s and 60s the way I did, I grew up in a conventional Italian household. So, you know, we had good food. It was a lot of plant food, but it was a lot of other things, meat and dairy and things of that nature. And I had a lot of intestinal problems as a child. And of course, living in New York, my parents took me to the best specialists in New York. And of course, all of those people, including gastroenterology people, it always amazes me how people that are focused on bowel health had no sense that anything related that nutrition would have any relationship to bowel health. And back in those days, the four basic food groups, two of them were meat and dairy. And so I had a lot of diet related stuff. I had a lot of, meat and bacon and eggs and all of that in my childhood. And it wasn't until I got into my teenage years and was going to college where I was going into a pre-med direction. I wanted to be a physician. And I met a man who was the father of a good friend of mine, and he had been a follower of the natural hygiene movement. He was an insurance salesman in the Bronx, but he had collected an anti-medical library for about 20 years. And he was in personal correspondence with Herbert Shelton. And Dr. Shelton was one of the granddaddies of the natural hygiene movement. For people that don't know what that is, that was a movement that looked at, it was the precursor to lifestyle medicine. It said healing is a natural process from within, but there were basic biological requirements that were based on nutrition and activity and stress and emotional poise, better restorative sleep, all of that. And so when he knew I was in a pre-med program, he would attack me at every turn. And I began to read my way through his library and adapting some of the plant-based eating at that time in my late teenage years and college years. All of the bowel issues became a thing of the past. So I thought that was pretty amazing that after 20 years of mismanagement with the best medical specialists in the world, it took an insurance salesman from the Bronx to solve the problems of colitis and bowel-related issues. So that set me on a path saying, you know what, I don't really want to be a medical physician. I want to do it a little bit more alternatively, more naturally. I decided that chiropractic would be a better path for that. I could be licensed. So I headed off to chiropractic college. And it's when I first met a lot of the pioneers in the natural field, or the field of natural hygiene and natural approaches to healthcare, and many people that ran fasting clinics and so on. So it was through that vehicle that I became more of a natural hygienic practitioner. I got my degree in chiropractic. I ran major centers. I ran a center in the late 1970s called the Shangri-La Natural Hygiene Institute. And it was founded by a man who rescued his life from malignant melanoma following the work of Shelton and even fasting with him in San Antonio, Texas. To make the story short, I did the program there. I decided I wanted to do more research. I went back to the Emory University School of Medicine, got a PhD in cell biology and neuroendocrinology, became an assistant professor at the University of Texas in the 1980s that did all of the original work on calorie restriction and aging. and then ran the Regency Health Spa in South Florida for 25 years, where we did fasting and we did nutritional care, all plant exclusive. That led me to some of my own centers after that, and even up to now, where I'm now doing retreats in a hotel on the ocean in Florida, which we're rebranding right now. And the new name of our center is the Healthful Living Ocean Retreat, and it's on the beach in Florida. So that encapsulates, the last from the 1970s on up to the present. But I was influenced by a lot of these hygienic pioneers and a lot of the writings of Shelton early on, but then having fasted and done my own clinical work, fasting over 10,000 people and dealing with people as a plant exclusive physician for the past, 48 years, brought me to where I am today.
Well, yeah, and that's quite a stellar background because, there's a lot of new people coming into the movement that are quote unquote experts after they've read one book or they've been doing this for 6 months, and you've been doing this for decades. Now,
I was doing it like Michael Clapper and I talked. We were doing it like the country song when it wasn't cool.
Yeah.
And now it's cool. And now you have the whole, the burgeoning explosion of lifestyle medicine, actually as if these physicians have invented lifestyle medicine. This was a hygienic situation that came from the 19th century, believe it or not. There were pioneers that pioneered this kind of lifestyle approach to care.
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody earlier today who actually we were considering him being on my show, and it turns out that he eats fish and dairy. And I said, well, I only interview those people who are 100% void of all animal and dairy. And I said, and when is it that you eat that? And he goes, when there's nothing else available. And I'm like, okay, we're not ready for this. And so let me ask you this, Dr. Frank. When somebody finishes listening to this conversation that we're having, what's one takeaway that they'll be able to apply to their life that they're going to gain benefit from in listening to your information? Because we're going to talk about your book and we're going to talk about the whole plant-based lifestyle.
There's so many pieces, but it really does start with food. So I'm hoping that they will be motivated to understand that the food that we're recommending, this plant exclusive approach, engenders what I'll call three love affairs that are critical for health on this planet. And that is personal health, the health of all species, brothers and sisters of all the species we interact with, and the health of the planet itself. And there's only one eating plan that supports all of that in the consciousness and this kind of spiritual connection to the real world that we live in. And that is a plant exclusive way of eating. So I'm hoping that they will leave more motivated to give plant exclusive eating a chance in their lives. That to me is a really important starting point on a physical, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual level.
I really appreciate that, because one of the things that I've heard you say, and I've heard a lot of the long-term influencers say, is the plant exclusive, where, there was the whole food plant-based, there's the plant-based diet, there's the plant-based eating, but plant exclusive kind of covers it all. And for those people, you mentioned that you grew up on meat and potatoes, and most of us did. How do you frame it for people today they've got various pre-diseases, or they've got the diseases, they're on major medications, and yet they insist on eating their meat and their dairy? What can you say that will help them to understand that it's not just about the animals? Because some people will throw that argument out saying, well, I don't care about the animals. It's like, well, God bless you, but what about you? What about you, the animal? So what can you say to people who insist on eating meat and dairy?
Well, when you look at people's habits, those are things that have been kind of, if you will, woven into their behavioral tapestry by a lot of use over a lot of time. It's almost as if every choice we make, the information we provide to the body, is in a way sculpting or etching pathways in the fabric of the nervous system that, in a sense, dictates how we respond and react in the world. So all of us are coming from a place of certain kinds of education and conditioning that have allowed us and actually fostered us to create these patterns of behavior. So now you're taking someone who's been living and believing in a certain way over a long period of time, and you're saying, you know what, that's really not the best way to go. I'm going to give you some tools that'll actually improve your opportunity on many levels for being well, for performing at a higher level. But on some level, we have to still have a certain amount of patience, forgiveness, and understanding that that person is not quite there yet. So how do you reach someone with a message that gives them the leeway to make certain kinds of change, maybe even incremental change, that over time now will become more of their working gestalt, more of the ways that they respond more naturally and consistently. So when I'm coming from where I am or from where you are, and I look out at the world, it feels that we're losing time to make incremental change. Animals are disappearing. The climate is, being destroyed. The planet is being destroyed. Diversity of species is disappearing. So when you look out, in my heart and soul, it almost feels like I want to take someone and say, look, you got to do it right now. We don't have this time for incremental change. But unfortunately, I know that's not how human beings operate. And so there has to be some, in a sense, patience, forgiveness, sensitivity, and compassion in how we share the information with people that maybe can get them to make some solid changes that they can live with, and let those changes kind of weave their way into their behavioral tapestry and lead them into more successful change over time. So for them, it may be plant-based initially, where they're doing a few, making some changes, but still having some of what they were doing. And hopefully it will move them into being plant exclusive. One of the things I've experienced over the years is that sometimes when you try to teach people where you are, and if you've evolved over a long period of time to a certain location in this world, and you try to teach people from that standpoint, they may not be quite there yet. And in a way, you may turn them off to making changes that could be very instrumental in their lives for benefit, and allow them to really get to a much better place. And they may, rebel and be turned off by that. So the real key is right now, I guess, is teaching people, giving them the material, the information that they can work with, giving them a leeway to make some changes, and making them aware that as you do this, some of the discomfort and the diseases and the changes you're experiencing, you're going to be shocked at how they change, how they shift. Because what we're talking about will not only prevent these things, they'll actually help you reverse them. And the idea of prevention and reversibility is a message that should be shared. So, a lot of times doctors like me and people like me that teach, they're often speaking to the choir most of the time, people that already are living this way or moving in that direction. But, I also speak to people that are not the choir, and those folks have to, they've got to find a place of making some ongoing incremental change that will lead them to a better place. So I don't know if that kind of addresses what you asked, but
it does.
I find that teaching is really a unique situation, sharing this information, because we want everyone to change instantaneously, but that's not how it happens.
Right. Well, and I think that it's meeting people where they're at, because right now, the whole issue of SNAP recently has been a big issue for a lot of people, saying, I can't afford groceries. And yet there are ways that people can really minimize their grocery bill when they eat plant exclusive. I did a pinto bean soup the other day that probably cost maybe for the whole batch. I think I'm way over budgeting. I think it was like $5 for the whole batch. And it lasted a few days. And it's like, there are ways to eat very, very healthy. But, and then for other people, it might be that they've been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, or they're pre-diabetic, or heart disease, which, leads really into your book. I have to say, this is a phenomenal, phenomenal book. It's called Weightless, Compassionate Weight Loss for Life. Compassionate Weight Loss. Let me say that all at one time. Weightless, compassionate weight loss for life. And I have to tell you, I'm doing a protocol right now where when I start a book, I have to finish it. That's kind of the agreement that I make with myself. And I sat down with your book, and it was like, oh, I'll definitely finish this book. But it's very weighty. It's very heavy in as far as like just the weight itself, but the amount of content that you give. This really, and you said it at the beginning of the book, that this is really the only book you're going to need in order to learn really about healthy eating, about healthy living. And I loved how you started it, where it was about the Statue of Liberty, where she's saying, "We welcome you're tired, you're basically frumpy, you're overweight, you're obese," and it was a very catchy beginning. And then you went into the various aspects of plant-exclusive lifestyles. You talked a lot about sugar, about supplements. And so what prompted you to write this book? And let's talk about the journey of writing the book.
All right, let's talk about that. Right out of the blocks, the book itself could be 5+ books.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to put everything in one place. And I tell people I wrote it as if I die tomorrow, everything's in one place. You know what I'm saying? So the bottom line is you can approach this book, and I talk about that in the introduction, by going to different sections and focusing on those. So one would be focusing on the nutrition piece. Then there's pieces on all the hormonal basis. Then there's pieces on addiction and lifestyle. So if you wanted to just understand the impact of stress on weight loss, you could go right to that section. Now, I urge people to read the whole thing, but you can dink and dance through the book without having to sit reading it cover to cover, though I think by doing that, you get the big picture that I want to share. The real purpose of this is that for too long, people have been given this idea that to maintain healthy weight or to resolve health issues, the only way they can do that is opt for eating plans that are focused on animal products. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you've got to have a keto diet with high animal fat or a high protein diet with animal flesh, or you have to have this, all of these dietary plans that give people the false idea that the only way you will be successful is if you eat these foods. And if you're eating plants, which are fundamentally carbohydrate that contain all the protein and starches and fats that we need, that you won't be successful. So I want people to understand that, number one, you don't have to eat those particular diets to be successful. The most successful weight loss approach is a low calorie density, high fiber, plant exclusive way of eating. Now, not only does that help you lose weight, not only does it help the individual improve their health, but it supports everything about every other creature and the planet itself in the process. What a phenomenal opportunity for someone to be successful by improving the success and opportunity for well-being of the entire world they live in. Mm-hmm. There is no other eating plan that allows that. So I wanted to dispel this myth that you need to opt for these extreme forms of animal-based diets to be successful. It is a lie, it is an untruth, and it's been harming people for as long as people have been eating these foods. And so that was fundamental to this idea, to give people the real information, and to secondly, make them aware that when we look at weight and health, it's not about food only. That the lifestyle components, the ways we function in the world, how we move, how we sleep, how we create addictions, how we deal with stress and allow ourselves to respond to the threatening circumstances of our lives, all of those pieces not only affect health, but they affect weight loss in particular. And so there's no place or no book that really puts all of those pieces together. And I wanted to, after all the years of counseling people with health and weight loss in all the centers that I've run, I wanted to kind of get all the information in one place so people could see the big picture.
Right, right. Okay. Well, I want to remind people that you're listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, and I am talking to the amazing Dr. Frank Sabatino. And Dr. Frank, before I go any further, what's the best way for people to find you? What would be?
Right now, you've got drfranksabatino.com as a website. And I also do consultations at Dr. Sabatino, Dr. Sabatino at TrueNorthHealth.com. Okay. And that's where they can actually do personal consultations with me. Great. We don't have a website yet for the rebranded new business that we're doing. That's in the process of being done. But that's going to be the, like I said, Healthful Living Ocean Retreat. and that's in Deerfield Beach, Florida. And we will be doing those once a month for a week. And the next one is January 18th to the 24th.
Excellent. And we'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. And I know that you have had amazing results, or I should say, the people that you have counseled have had amazing results by going to your live retreats. So I'm going to encourage people. Not only do I want you to pick up the book, just go to Amazon. It's on Amazon. And I'll tell you, it's going to be one of the best books that you can add to your personal library around health and fitness. And there's a spiritual aspect to this too, which I think is pretty amazing. And also to go to the live retreat. It's going to be once a week, every month.
Once a month.
Once a month, once a week, every month. And
and I want people to realize,
okay.
When you write a book, a lot of times, you put all those captions by famous people that talk about how cool your book is, when most of the time they've never even looked at it.
Right.
You got all these famous people. So what I did is I only put a couple of things. And then I put the first 10 pages are real world testimonials by people that have been through the program. And so I thought that was a much better thing to put at the front end of the book than famous people just dropping names. I was very happy and very fortunate to have the incredible Colin Campbell write the foreword to my book. And so Colin and I know each other a long time, and he was so taken by the book that he was motivated to write the foreword. And I was very pleased and happy that he did do that.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. And there's some great testimonials in there. And again, I do encourage people to get the book. We'll put the link in the show notes. Now you mentioned True North, and I know that you are a proponent of water fasting, and yet there's a right way to do it. And there's a very dangerous way to do it. And a lot of people, they go to social media, they go to Instagram, TikTok, and they watch these so-called influencers talking about water fasting, and that can literally kill them. So let's talk about why True North and why the way that you propose that people do water fasting.
Yeah, there are only a few places in the country that do really well monitored and supervised water fasting. I ran year-round centers where we did extended fast. Because I'm only doing week to 10-day retreats now, people can still water fast with me, but for only very short periods of time, 5 to 7 days. For longer fasts, and even if you're out west and you want to do shorter, True North is a fantastic place. It is really the premier place on the planet for extended, really well monitored, carefully monitored fasts. They're in Santa Rosa, California, and they are an amazing center. Yeah, it was funny to me because there was a period of time, I don't see it anymore, where you had these fasting sites on Facebook and Instagram, and people would follow these sites and then do these extensively long fasts at home. And the posts would be things like, I'm having excruciating back and pain in my side. I'm on the 30th day of a water fast. Anybody have any ideas? And this would be the post online, and I'd cringe, and I'd be like, oh my God, you can't do that. When we fast people, we have a pre-evaluation that involves a metabolic profile blood test, because we've got to make sure that there's certain things in the blood work that make that person even a candidate for fasting. So if they don't have good kidney function, like if their GFR, their filtration rate is too low, they're not a good candidate for fasting, because a lot of work that happens, elimination of fluid and movement in fasting, happens through the kidney. So, we're looking at, they can't have any profound anemia or blood loss. So there's things that we look for. So that's kind of a pre-screen. Then when people come in, we're monitoring them twice a day, doing vital signs, temperature, all of those things, pulse, pressure, checking urine samples, things of this nature, which we take very seriously. That's why I like our program in Deerfield, because we're right on the ocean and have these beautiful, beautiful, spanking, beautiful rooms. And if you're fasting and you're having to spend a little bit more time quietly in bed or in your room, you've got these beautiful ocean views where I am, which is really perfect. But the bottom line is we're really wanting to make sure that people understand that after a few days of not eating, if you're going to really fast and you're fasting for any kind of serious health issue, whether that's, an inflammatory disease or an autoimmune disease or high blood pressure, or whatever, you should be under good supervision. And we recommend that. And one of the biggest things that's important about fasting is when you break the fast. And that means, the refeeding phase really needs to be done very, very carefully. And that's where the monitoring team comes in handy, whether you're with me or you're with True North or whomever. And even during the fast, you got to realize fasting is a resting process. You're trying to harbor as much energy of the individual for the work of detoxification, healing, and repair as you can. So if you move a lot during a fast, energy can't be everywhere at the same time. If you're using energy for movement and activity, there's less available for the work of healing and repair. So we recommend absolute rest. I've seen these recommendations online where they got people exercising vehemently, vigorously during fast. It's not a good idea. It will actually raise blood pressure. It will actually drop blood sugar quicker, creating more hypoglycemic episodes that could be dangerous. Overall, it's not a good thing to do. So
Right.
the key is we want it monitored. We want it under resting conditions. You want to make sure you're adequately hydrating with enough water, but not overhydrating, because you can create problems with sodium drops like hyponatremia, things of that nature. So you want all of these things to be in proper balance, and that's where the monitoring comes into play. If you look at me or Dr. Goldhammer or people like that that have monitored fast, we've monitored, hundreds of thousands of fast days and probably, 50,000 plus fasts over time. That experience counts for something. It really is important for people to have those kinds of people really giving them insight during the fasting process.
I love that because unfortunately, there's the plus side and the downside of social media. And unfortunately, there are people that they put information out there that, again, it could be deadly to people. Now, you talked about the inflammatory diseases. What are some of the most common inflammatory diseases that are actually growing in numbers, and what causes inflammatory
Well, you
diseases?
can make the case that all chronic disease is inflammatory.
Okay.
So the bottom line is if you really look at what causes damage and this lack of ease or disease, there are two fundamental processes that operate. One is chronic inflammation, and the other is oxidative stress. So let's just briefly describe both of those because they're what we're addressing. People, when you say the word inflammation, I think most people, out of the blocks would have this negative reaction to that word. When in fact, inflammation is one of the most powerful processes of the body that promotes healing and repair. So if I cut my arm or I'm in an accident or whatever, the body will create an inflammatory process around an area of damage that plays a major role in helping that area heal. So skin will heal, tissues that are cut will heal, all of that. But if inflammation goes on chronically, because the conditions of irritation and abuse and toxicity are not being reduced, then we move into a heavier state of chronic inflammation that plays a role in chronic disrepair, damage, aging, and most of the chronic degenerative diseases. So eating and living in a way that allows the body to create inflammation in an acute sense when it needs it, but ratchets it down so it's not chronically elevated and increased, that's really the goal when we talk about inflammation. For example, a good classic example of this is what happened during the COVID infection. When the body has a viral infection, one of the things it has to create through the immune system is an inflammatory process to help the body deal with that virus. So that's a normal part of living.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those viruses like the COVID virus, they're respiratory viruses, so they kind of target the lungs. So when that virus approaches the lungs or infects the lungs, the body's going to create an inflammatory process to kind of get rid of that virus. That's part of what it wants to do. Unfortunately, if you already have a high level of inflammation going on in the body because of toxicity or eating processed and animal-based foods or dealing with a lot of stress, you've already got a high level of inflammation. So now if you get infected, the body's going to have to increase the inflammatory process above that. And now you can get into a chronic state of disrepair. And in inflammation, the body releases a class of chemicals called cytokines, which kind of target the body where to go to deal with this inflammatory process. And then if in that infection, you can get a cytokine storm. So the inflammation can become exaggerated. And that's what happened for people that were dealing and dying from COVID. Their lungs were getting chronically exaggerated inflammation. They were unable to breathe. They would end up on respirators. And those cytokines, the inflammatory process, is dramatically enhanced by the increase in body fat. So when fat levels go up in the body, fat cells overproduce these inflammatory chemicals. And that's why people that were overweight and overfat during the COVID epidemic or pandemic were 5 to 6 times more likely to end up on a respirator, people that were heavier and obese, because they already were exaggerating the inflammatory process. So chronic inflammation needs to be addressed, and living in a plant-exclusive way with, again, good sleep and stress management and things of that nature will really bring that inflammation down. The other thing that happens is that there is an assault by these very active forms of oxygen called free radicals. And oxygen is a very unstable element. And so, again, I don't want to get too technical, but the electron nature of oxygen, it's kind of lacking certain electrons. So it wants to stabilize itself by kind of getting these in different chemical reactions and from different tissues. Now, every second of every day, we have oxygen being processed in the little energy factories of our cells called mitochondria. And the body's taking the glucose, the sugar in the plants that we eat, in the presence of the oxygen that we breathe. And in those energy factories, it's producing all the packets of energy that we need to do everything that we do. But because the energy factory is turning over oxygen, it's also producing these more frenetic active forms that we call free radicals. And we know that free radicals are linked with every major disease process. It's a process called oxidation. And if it happens in the membrane of a cell, it's lipid or fat oxidation, which is linked with cancer and heart disease and so many other problems. But here's the key. Those free radicals are also called oxidants. So any way that we can increase chemicals in the body that get rid of those, something that we call antioxidants, helps us deal with the stress of those free radicals. But when free radicals develop beyond the ability of the body to quench them with antioxidants, you have a form of stress called oxidative stress. And that's a major component of all chronic disease. Here's the beautiful thing. All of the antioxidants that help us reduce oxidative stress, guess where they are? In all the colors of fruits and vegetables. So you don't need to be a biochemist, you just need to put a rainbow on your plate. And when you're getting these particular foods, you're reducing the two basic pillars of damage in the human body, chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. And that's why that inflammation is linked with everything from heart disease to kidney disease to type 2 diabetes to cancer. You can't have cancer unless there's a chronic inflammatory change going on in a local tissue, in a local organ. And over time, that cells will be damaged. Over time, there'll be scarring and changes, and the cells will start to de-differentiate. All kinds of things begin to happen. But it all starts with chronic inflammation and oxidative stress. And those two things are dramatically eliminated by living in a plant-exclusive way.
Well, you mentioned about being overfat, and I think that unfortunately we've gotten to a place in our society where if you say anything that appears to be negative, then you're shaming people, and the whole thing of fat shaming. And the reality is when somebody is overweight, when they're obese, they are more prone to various diseases. So how do you address that issue of people saying, well, I'm proud of my body and, I'm 100 pounds overweight, but according to the scale, and yet that's what's causing their problems. So how do we address that?
The last thing I would ever want to do is shame anybody about anything. And I like the sense of people feeling good in their own bodies, because I think for the longest time, we had artificial descriptions of beauty that were coming from the entertainment industries or whatever. And people were trying to achieve these things to their detriment. Because the truth of the matter is that some of that is dictated genetically and so on. So, you've got to get a sense of what's right in your own body. But if I tell somebody they have type 2 diabetes and they got elevated blood sugar, nobody walks away feeling like I shamed them about their
Right.
blood sugar. So we need to start understanding that if you're carrying that extra fat, you have the potential for much greater chronic inflammation and disease generation. And doing it in a compassionate and loving way, saying, look, you need to really address this health risk. And here's a way to do that without saying, look at you, you're a fat person. We're not
Right.
doing that. What we're saying, though, is that it's not time to embrace your fatness. It's not time to, it would be like saying, I'm going to embrace the fact I just love my cancer. And you could do that and see that as part of your body. But we also know that it's something it's not a healthy outcome. And so the bottom line is, I don't want to shame people, but at the same time, they need to realize that being over fat and overweight is a health risk. And how can you address that in a very conscious way and still feel good about yourself, that you're taking active steps to improve your health? The same way somebody that is diagnosed with heart disease doesn't walk away feeling like they're shamed by heart disease. They
Right.
realize that they either have to do something to change it or they're not going to survive very well. So we need to take it out of the arena of shaming and that emotional connotation. And I realize that it's very difficult because people are very touchy and they want to feel that they're right in their fatness or in their disease. And the fact of the matter is, maybe I can get away with it a little bit easier because I come from being a physician. And when people come in to see me, we can talk about it a certain way. Whereas maybe their neighbor telling them that they're overweight may be something that's, really creates a battle or creates a fight or creates a response. But the truth is, we need to look at it in a way that we're not celebrating a factor of disease. It would be like me celebrating eating high fat that causes heart disease.
Right.
Why would I want to celebrate that?
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of eating, let's say that, through the conversation that we've had, people are thinking, I think I'll give this a try. What would be the best way for somebody to start who is living by the standard American diet? They're eating a lot of ultra processed foods. They are over fat. They know that they're putting their health at risk, and if it's already not at risk. So what would be a process somebody could go through that minimizes if you will, the trauma to the body? Because I know that for some people, they actually have withdrawals over the ultra processed foods. So share with us what a protocol could be. And we're not giving medical advice. We are merely having a conversation.
When you look at it, 60% of the diet of most Americans is ultra processed food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people need to realize that ultra processed food is not food. It is a monstrosity. I call it the Frankenstein of foods because what they are is they're lab generated, they're lab created and loaded with artificial flavors and colors and various chemicals and things that have been created over time. But 60% of the diet is that. 30 to 40% then are also cooked and processed animal foods.
Right.
Less than 5% of the diet is fruits, vegetables, and greens. So the starting point for me is how can you start building that 5% up? How can you start maybe doing something as simple as getting several pieces of fresh fruit a day? Really, the first thing that has to happen is the ultra processed food has to be abandoned. It has to be eliminated. The next thing is make fruit your sweet. Anytime you want anything sweet, make it fresh fruit. Try to get in maybe one nice salad a day. Try to at least several times a week replace your animal proteins with lentils and beans and whole grains and things of that nature. So create a little model that you can work with where you're starting to bring things in while you're starting to make things exit from that eating plan. But the first thing is that ultra processed component has to be virtually eliminated as quickly as possible because it's not food. And I'd rather see you eat things that are not as high quality, that at least are food, but not completely ultra processed. So the goal would be getting a little more fresh fruit, getting rid of ultra processed food, building in some fresher fruits and vegetables, maybe one nice salad a day with a wide variety of greens and veggies and the like, and then at least several meals a week where you're getting things like rice and beans or potatoes and vegetables steamed and things of that nature. And there are many ways. My book has programs for that, but there are things online for that. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Forks Over Knives. You've got a lot of resource material now that's available online. You even have people doing cooking shows and doing food presentations, whether it's people like Chef AJ or Jeff Novick or other people that have been doing this a very long time. So, these things are available, but you've got to start with getting the most profoundly devastating food out, and that is that ultra processed component.
Right.
It's got to be removed, and then start getting some fresh fruit, some salad, some fresh stuff in the diet, how often and as well as you can do that. And then that's a good starting point.
And I do want to talk about ultra processed vegan food, because I actually I've been since 2018 is when I gave up all animal products, meat and dairy, everything. And within a week, I was feeling great. I was about 40 pounds heavier than I am now, and I had dropped the weight. I was getting in great shape. And then first I identified only as plant-based. And then I started calling myself vegan. So when I said vegan, all of a sudden I gave myself a pass to start eating the processed vegan food. And it's really interesting, because that's where you have people say, oh, that vegan diet is so expensive. Well, I started getting sluggish again. I started gaining the weight. I had all the same symptoms as I had when I was a meat eater, but I just wasn't eating meat and dairy, but I was eating ultra processed foods. And a few months ago, I actually made a hard and fast rule for myself. That's it. I'm done. After that, I had 2 containers of Ben & Jerry dairy-free ice cream one night. And I'm like, what am I doing? What in the world am I doing? And I mean, I had to look at my own alignment and with my values of saying, here, I'm plant-based. I'm running a show called Plant-Based Eating for Health, but I'm not walking the talk. And so I just pulled my own covers and I said, that's it. And since that time, been on the straight and narrow. It works for me. I've been sober for 42 years, so I'm very black and white in my life. And let's talk about those people who they have if you will, a misunderstanding that vegan processed food is not plant exclusive. So how do you have that conversation with somebody?
Well, the conversation varies on what's important to those people, meaning that if they're just thinking about a vegan lifestyle that's protecting, let's say, animals and the planet, they may not care about the fact that it's something that, you need to go into more of a whole. You'll notice in my intro, I discriminate and I go into whole plant exclusive vegan. So I actually use the word vegan if you want to use it, but in context with whole food, whole plant food, because vegan by its nature doesn't mean you eat junk. It just means you're avoiding animal products on every level. That means clothing, food, everything. So the bottom line is what's happening is many people, when they're making a transition, we kind of alluded to this earlier, they want things that somewhat resemble what they were eating before. And so that's where the place comes in for, vegan processed hot dogs or hamburgers or whatever. Now, it so turns out that you do have burgers and things of that nature that are not ultra processed, that are made with beans and vegetables and grains. So you can start urging people to move into those kinds of things and away from stuff like you talked about Ben & Jerry's ice cream. They have now companies that have 2 or 3 ingredients in a vegan ice cream. So it doesn't have all the coconut oil. So that may be something they go to in a pinch. I'm not going to get crazy about that, because the bottom line is whatever brings them into the fold, I'm happy. I want animals and the planet to stop being abused. But if your goal is personal health, you've got to get into whole food nutrition. And that's where the vegan name, which is why a lot of doctors got turned off to using vegan. I'm not afraid of the V word, because the V word is really addressing an entire lifestyle, not just food choices. So I like the V word for that reason. When you think about the fact that there are hundreds of millions of tons of animal parts being used every year for upholstery and clothing and shoes and all of it, even if you stop killing animals for food, you would be killing trillions of animals just for their body parts for upholstery and clothing. So, you've got to address the fact that that's also part of the dance. You got to shift how you shop for clothing, not just food. You got to shift how you shop for upholstery and things in your home and in your car. I mean, if you really want to get into what this is about, you've got to embrace all of that, not just food. But from the food standpoint, look, people are going to get into mock burgers and mock this and mock that, as long as they can do it in the context of getting an abundance of whole, fresh food along with it. That may be the step that they have to take to get to the next level. And I'm not going to get too crazy about it, but your point is well made, because there are a lot of people held back in their own health outcome because they never move past all of those processed vegan foods. At their very best, all they are is a small transition, and you need to move past them. And I try to emphasize that with people.
Well, for me, it's like I saw both sides of the fence on that, because when I first became plant-based, it was incredible, the transformation I went through in mind, body, and soul. And then just eased back into eating junk food, basically, and then and saw what it did to me, not only physically, because I gained the weight back, I was tired in the afternoon, I wasn't motivated, and then I thought, okay, let's go back, and boom, within a week, I'm just like, this is amazing, So I think we can be our own laboratory by putting
people don't realize that food is information. It's energetic. We operate at a very simplistic level of just chemicals and a mechanistic worldview, so to speak. If you really look at the human body, it's very electromagnetic in nature. All of the things we're eating, all of the vibration of the colors of those plants and vegetables are various chemicals that operate at a certain vibratory level. So when you're informing the body with that, it's a vibrational information. It's an energetic, informative process. And I think the question then is, how do you want to inform your body? What kind of information do you want to give it? I mean, it's that old statement, garbage in, garbage out. And so, if you're putting garbage in, what can you expect is going to come out? What's going to come out in your performance or your well-being? Garbage. So if you want to really improve the energetics of how we think and the stability of our mood and our mind and our performance and our well-being, how do you want to inform your body? Well, you want to give it the best information possible at the highest energetic level possible. And that's whole plant food nutrition. There is nothing higher than that.
Absolutely. And, in your book, I think it was the last chapter, you really got into the spiritual side of things. And there's a lot of spiritual energy throughout the book, but you talk about Ahimsa, and tell people what Ahimsa is and why.
Well, let me define spirituality first, so
okay.
people understand where I'm coming from, because I think for so many people that word itself it kind of inspires a kind of a frou-frou notion in their mind. It's kind of like we lost touch with the earth. When I talk about spirituality, it's not a religious concept.
Right.
Religiosity is one thing. Everybody has a right to serve and worship their own gods and their religions. I could care less about all of that. That's a personal choice. Spirituality is looking at when we make choices as individuals, what are the consequences and ramifications of those choices in the consciousness of the world around us. So, for example, when we look at what we're putting on our plate and we're eating, the consequences of those choices is not limited by the boundaries of our own plates or our own kitchens. They have impact on how food is being handled, how food is being processed, how it's being produced, how agriculture is being directed. What are we doing and how we grow things? What are the chemicals we're putting in plants and the earth to get these production values up? So all of that are consequences of our personal choices. So for me, spirituality is really looking at, when we make a choice, how does it impact everyone around us, everything around us? That's spirituality to me. What I like about the vegan, whole plant exclusive approach, and Ahimsa is part of this, it's a mentality of doing no harm. It's a mentality of, when we make choices, how do we support the integrity of people and animals and the earth in a way where we honor and respect the creation of all of that? How do we respect the conscious creation that we operate within by making choices that support that on every level. That's really what spirituality to me is about. And the only place I've ever really found that was embracing this kind of a lifestyle.
Right.
The Ahimsa movement goes back centuries and centuries in India and parts of the world of that ilk, where they were really addressing the idea of doing no harm. And I personally, when we look now and you realize that 90%, according to Sailesh Rao and climate healers, almost 90% of all the devastation of climate is related to food production from animal-based sources. So the fact that we're killing animals in what's called animal agriculture, which I hate that phrase because it sounds so benevolent. It's not benevolent at all. It's full of vicious, violent devastation, killing, and murder. So the bottom line is, when we talk about that 90% of catastrophic climate change is that all the entropy we're taking 80, almost like 85% of all the land that's producing food, or all the food that's grown, is feeding animals that only give us back 15% of food. The bottom line is we're using up all that land, all that entropy. It takes 100 times more land to produce a gram of protein from plant sources like grains or legumes than it does to produce beef. So now you're losing all of the energetics of that land, creating all of that disorder, what we call entropy. So the bottom line is, on a physical entropy energy disorder level, on the fact that we're devastating climate, the fact that we have 1 billion people more that are dealing with food insecurity and starvation because they can't get at food that's being fed to animals that are then being fed to a very small part of the global population. Well, we've got something like 50 million people starving in the US. Mm-hmm. About 15 million of them are children. Mm-hmm. And this statistic of the fact that 25,000 people, including 10,000 children, die every single day from starvation. So the next day we get up, another 10,000 children have died because they can't access food. Right. So to me, making a choice of plant-based living or plant-exclusive living is not just a personal choice, it's an existential imperative. It's an imperative to make those choices. And I recommend what I call the Hippocratic Oath of Humanity, and that is just do no harm. Right. And that do no harm has to come from every single one of us, consciously understanding that when we make choices, they have ramifications outside of our own individual lives.
That you really shined a light on the whole issue of food insecurity. And what I encourage people to do is check with your local county statistics and find out how much food insecurity is going on in your own county. In our county, in Lane County in Oregon, 47% of families are living with food insecurity. And that's a real nice way of saying they don't have enough to eat, period.
Yeah, that means they're dying of starvation.
Absolutely. And so once I realized that, now I've gotten involved in some programs to help raise awareness around that, and also to do what I can to mitigate the problem. But Frank, in closing, what are your final thoughts for people? And is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
No, I think the most important thing is for people to realize that they have this incredible ability and power to heal within themselves. For so long, we felt the need to reach outside, to put our faith and hope in voices of authority outside of ourselves because we didn't have the resources within. The truth is, you have the greatest ally in history, which is the wisdom and intelligence of the human body itself, that is doing things in healing that is so far beyond our wildest imagination, we'll never even get close to truly understanding it. And that by putting in play very simple, basic requirements and choices on a daily basis, we give ourselves the maximal opportunity to experience that power in all its beauty and all of its splendor. And so I recommend understanding that the simple choices of eating whole foods and moving more and working on more emotional poise and better connection in our relationships and looking at our own addictions and understanding what they mean in the context of our lives, really embracing these simple lifestyle choices with this incredible ally of the power and wisdom of our own being. We have this incredible opportunity to not only prevent most of the things we suffer with, but actually to reverse most of those things too. So I just want to leave people with this idea that you've got this incredible ability and power. Maximize it, identify with it, align with it, and that by aligning with it with choices that support, the way the best food sources on the planet, whole plant exclusive foods, you're also making this incredible spiritual connection and support for all of conscious life around you. That's a remarkable return on your investment.
Absolutely. And Dr. Frank Sabatino, this has been delightful. And for people that are watching and listening, I encourage you, go out and get the book Weightless by Dr. Frank Sabatino. You can get it on Amazon. You can read my review of the book. And I will tell you, I'll give you a verbal right now. Great book, excellent resource. And I do encourage you to read it from front to back and then highlight it. There's going to be plenty of information in there that you'll want to refer back to. You've been listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, encouraging you. Think about what you're putting into your mind, body, and soul, and do good in all that you do. Have a great day. You've been listening to the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. I'm your host, Kathleen Gage, inviting you to subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening or watching the show. And please let your friends know about the Plant-Based Eating for Health podcast show. Live healthy.